Hi everyone! In this video we will express a perfect square trinomial in factored form. Factor 64r squared plus 48r plus 9. We were told that this is a perfect square trinomial, so we'll go ahead and factor it as such, but then we'll factor it again in case we didn't know it was a perfect square trinomial and work through the problem a second time. Let's go ahead and factor it as a perfect square trinomial because we were told such first. Knowing that it's a perfect square trinomial, we're still going to want to look for a greatest common factor just to make sure that we don't have anything that will go into every single term. And 64, 48, and 9 do not have anything in common, so we're not going to factor anything out of all three of those. So let's go ahead and work through the perfect square trinomial pattern. A perfect square trinomial pattern says that we square root the first one and we put it into our binomial in the first term. Then we square root the last one and put it into the last position of our binomial. And then we square the entire binomial and take the sign of the middle term. So square rooting our 64r squared. 64 is 8 times 8, so the square root of 64 is 8. And the square root of r squared is r, because r times r is r squared. So this goes into our first position of our trinomial, or our binomial. Now we will square root our last term, which is the square root of 9, giving us 3, and we fill it in here. Then we take the sign of the middle, which is positive, and now using our pattern, we have completely factored this perfect square trinomial. We can double check that it is a perfect square by multiplying the term inside the first and the last term of our binomial and doubling it to see if it matches the middle term of our trinomial. 8 times 3, 8r times 3 is 24r. Multiplying this by 2 to double it gives us 48r, which does indeed match the middle term. So we did do this correctly, and that is our binomial. So we have completely factored it. If you would like to see how to factor it, not knowing that it's a perfect square trinomial, you can continue the video. However, if you just needed to know the perfect square trinomial pattern, then you are sufficiently done and can turn off the video. For the rest of you who'd like to stay, if you are factoring and don't know that it's a perfect square trinomial, we would go back to the AC method, in which we would take 64, the A, and multiply it to C, which is 9, giving us the number 576. And then we would find all of the factors of 576, and we would just start at 1 and move forward by dividing it and see which ones would give me a whole number for factors. I'll go ahead and fill that in using my calculator. Once we finish our chart, we go look at the trinomial, and the sign of the last term is positive. This tells us that the factors will be the same sign. Then we look at the sign of the middle term, and this tells us that those same signs will be positive. If that was a negative sign, that would tell us that both of the signs would be negative. In this case, it tells us all of the signs are positive, and we can fill in our factors. Now we're going to find a combination of these factors to give us our middle term of 48. So when I add, I get 577. That's a bit larger than 48, so I'm going to go down to the smaller numbers and see if I can find a combination that will give me positive 48. And I can see adding 24 and 24 gives me positive 48. That means I can replace the middle term with 24r and 24r, giving us 64r squared plus 24r plus 24r plus 9. Then we will factor by grouping. We'll group our first two together and our second two together and find common factors. 64 and 24 are both divisible by 8 and r. So we'll remove 8 and r, factoring them out, leaves us with 8r, and 24 divided by 8 is positive 3, and r divided by r cancels. Then in 24r plus 9, we'll factor out a positive 3, which leaves us with 8r plus 3. Now we will factor again using the greatest common factor, and in both of these terms, it seems that our binomial 8r plus 3 is in common. So the greatest common factor we factor out is 8r plus 3, which leaves us with 8r plus 3. 8r plus 3. Now that we can see that those are the exact same binomials, we can rewrite that as 8r plus 3 squared because there's two of them. Either way that you want to factor your perfect square trinomial is correct, but you'll note if you know the pattern on the left side, it's much faster than the right. However, if you don't recognize the pattern right off, you can go ahead and do the AC method just as we've always done before, and you will end up with the right answer. And now that we've factored it both ways, we're all done.